Good evening there. Welcome to QTV Youth Dialogue, and I am your host, Jennifer Sonko. It's always good to be back. I know our episode last week was repeated due to reasons beyond our control, but like I always say, consistency is one of the objectives of this particular program, working towards bringing you fresh episodes every single week. So just to tell you, today we're live in the studio, and we'll be having an in-depth conversation when it comes to sexual and gender-based violence. I know the 16 days of activism has passed, but as a program, we just feel like we've not dealt with it in depth. So that is why today I'm joined by Mamadou Lamine Davis. He for she, should I say? How should I introduce you?
He for she, always.
Okay,
always.
Thank you so much for joining us on the program, Mamadou Lamine Davis. We also have Aissatou Sam here, and she's from the Female Lawyers Association. It is important that we bring out the legal context when it comes to sexual and gender-based violence. Thank you so much for joining us.
Very well. Thank you very much, Jenaba. Good evening to you. Good evening to viewers. By way of introduction, I am Aissatou Sam, the coordinator of the Female Lawyers Association Gambia.
Okay, thank you so much for joining us here.
Thank you.
And I have this feeling that when it comes to lawyers, saying very well is a thing for them. So throughout this program, we're expecting both of them to be saying very well. Is it a thing?
Of course.
It's a thing, I came to realize. But anyway, Aissatou, I will start with you. Tell us what the law says, first of all, because whatever you do, you have to base it on law. It is based on law that all these activists are out there on a daily basis fighting for the rights of women when it comes to sexual and gender-based violence. So first of all, just to lay the foundation, what does the law say in relation to sexual and gender-based violence?
Thank you very much for that question. And before I talk about that, I would just briefly want to give about my workplace flag, the association I work with.
Sure. Probably we can do that at the end before we close.
Very well.
Yes.
In the first of all, sexual and gender-based violence is said to be any form of violence or any act that is inflicted or perpetrated on another person on the basis of gender differences, based on perhaps norms and values, or on the basis of power inequality. In the Gambia, we have gender-based violence in its context is very broad. So we have different categories of gender-based violence. We have what we call physical violence. Physical violence is the form of violence where like a person attacks another person on the basis of gender differences or on the basis of power inequality. Like when I slap a person or when I kill another person with or without weapon, it's a form of physical violence, and it is against our laws. We have laid down laws which I will talk about later during the course of the discussions. Aside from that, we also have what we call sexual violence. Sexual violence is any form of violence, like in our Sexual Offences Act, it talks about or addresses sexual harassment, sexual exploitation, sexual abuse, which also involves rape. It is said that any form of sexual violence is actually prohibited in our laws. Like sexual violence can come in where the use of force, because when you approach a person in order to satisfy your sexual desires, if a person says no, no is no. If you use any kind of force just to satisfy your sexual desires without the consent of that person, consent is very important when it comes to sex. Without the consent of that person, so you may be liable to sexual violence.
Okay, so Aissatou, comme tay góor gis jigéen muy dox mu ne ko diw, you know, all of those things.
Catcalling.
Thank you very much. Catcalling. Are those things also classified?
It's a form of sexual harassment.
Okay.
Yes. Even like just seeing a person walking, it's a form of sexual harassment. Perhaps you're doing it, I don't like it, so it's a form of sexual harassment and it's against our laws.
Okay. Kontaan naa si fact bi ne am nañ fi góor. Góor bi nga xam ne tamit dinañu mën a gën a guide when it comes to tey suñu waxtaan bi. Aissatou, dañ dee dugga si biir dëkk bi di dégg ne góor mënut a nekk he for she. Musoon nañ ko fee waxtaanee waaye important na tam pour ñu bring ko out again, because tey dinañ mën a jël calls. So nit ñi dinañ mën a call at some point, dinañ ubbi line si pour nit ñu call wax ñu ñoom yan lan lañ nekk di def pour protect jigéen bi. So góor waat ma laajte la waat mun naa nekk he for she, parce que gis nañ ne yéen sometimes ngeen nekk he for she sa olbateku waat nekk leneen.
No, without an iota of doubt, of course, góor mun naa nekk he for she. Lu important mooy liggéey bi nga def ak ndax gom nga ko. I keep saying this and I said this in our last program. Ma ne pour man góor yi nekkuñ problème wala jigéen yi nekkuñ problème. pour man the problem is patriarchy. The patriarchy góor yi ak jigéen yi yëpp dañ ko dee mën a advance dañ ko dee mën a entrench. Lu mu wax si gender based violence just to give a little bit of context. Gender is the socially ascribed rules given to people. Because yow góor nga war a jigéen nga. As a góor ni nga war a doxalee wala as a jigéen ni nga war a acté wala doxalee noonu. Loolu mooy gender. Ba pare soo ñëwee nga xool violence, it's the intentional use of power or position with the aim of inflicting pain on another person. Doole la nga jël sa doole mbaa sa place pour métital wala toroxal keneen. Because yow maybe yaay papi xale bi xam nga ne yow papi xale bi doole wala yow teacher nga xam nga ne yow xale bi doole nga jaay ko doole mbaa jigéen bi pour lor ko. Loolu mooy let's say gender based violence is perpetrated on a person on the basis of his or her gender. Times without number man I do trainings on GBV. Man am ay góor ñu dee ñëw si man. dañ ma dee explain na lu leen seen jabar yi dee def si biir kër yi.
So da nga bëgg a wax ne nekkul jigéen ñi rek lañ dee abuse góor ñi dañ leen dee abuse tam.
lu si ëpp doole góor yi ñoo ko dee teg jigéen ñi. waaye jigéen ñi
nañ wax te mu leer.
Of course jigéen waaye jigéen dañ dee sexually abuse góor yi. dañ doon wax harassment. Sexual harassment is any unwanted sexual advance or advances. maa ngi romba man góor yi maa ngi enu weñ maa ngi ponkal maybe maa ngi am chest. nga naa ma waaye sa ab si nii ñëw laal sama ab si laal sama chest bi yow yaa ngi say am sexual gratification.
Davis waxi loolu teguñu fi de.
loolu wax dëgg trop.
teguñu fi nag ay tudd nañ ko wax dem leer ci beginning wax yooyu teguñu fi. ñun daal fi mu ne nii. jigéen ñi métit yu ñu leen di teg. because nañ nangu ne jigéen yaa gën a vulnerable.
I agree.
wax boobu ñu fi teg.
Men are the biggest perpetrators of sexual and gender based violence. And the biggest victims are women and girls.
Exactly.
But so you know what I mean? Man, I'm going to have an honest conversation.
Wow.
Because there's no way we can end SGBV without having an honest conversation.
Okay.
But you see, very goria ko de tek jigeni. Because we bari dey fog ne comme it's normal. Jigen mu romba nga xol ko ko yena façon cadeau yi. Jigen mu romba nga laal yaramam bi daf dey am. Comme lu mu wax rek so xolé let's say sexual violence. Amna buñ dey oyé quid pro quo as a form of sexual harassment where people would exchange sex for grades. Ñu bari defoon dafa normal. Yaa ngi si university bi, yaa ngi high school wala junior school, sa lecturer bi mu ne la kay ñu tedda ma jox la 100 in maths or English daf dee am. Waaye dafa wax lu important muy consent. Consent is beyond saying yes I want to do this. Consent is about understanding the aftermath of saying yes I want to do this. Su dee man bu ma fi doon ñëw man la neex ma ñëw su ma ñëwutoon kenn du ma door du dëgg waaye su dee yow danga ma ne su ma ñëwutoon soo ñëwutee Davis dinaa la door mbaa dinaa la teg métit mbaa wala sa waa kër loolu tax na ma ragal ma ñëw even su ma nangoo sa consent boobu noonu taxawat understand so jigéen yu bari of course góor dañ jël maa ngi ko doon chase maa ngi ko doon wax lii mu ngi smile dafa mel ni nangu na wala bëgg na ko consent goes beyond that consent is about understanding the aftermath of saying yes moo tax xale du dee mën a joxe consent because in that material moment su dee yow da nga mandi wala da nga dof even soo nangoo ne bëgg naa lii waaye ndax yow understand nga lu tax yow nga bëgg a def loolu noonu that is a different ball game altogether but of course all of these different forms of gender based violence from physical dafa am bu garaaw ma dee boo ñu dee waxtaanee dama foog ne because dañ ko dee oversight also it's called emotional or psychological violence gis naa when you suffer from physical violence it's violence that is perpetrated or meted on your body as a person dinañ fa gis gaañu dinañ fa gis lacerations sometimes you will have blood oozing out of your body or nose it's easy for you to am support if you're suffering from what is called emotional or psychological abuse it's difficult for you to xam what you're going through understand this has to do with name calling sometimes maybe góor boo xam ne am na ñaari doomu jigéen 4 5 study oye gaay tur war a jabaram yow doo dara yaa ngi ne jigéen nga ma dee indil yow mun loo dara jigéen yi nga xool sa doomu jigéen yi man suma sañoon sax ñëpp ngeen dee góor laa bëggoon and things like that understand daf dee am wala sax nga am xale boo xam ne maybe mu ngay dem school dafa passé also nga ko wax na façon kaddu yi mbaam nga da nga dof you are very stupid things like that wala nga gis góor yoo xam ne duñ dóor seen jabar yi de duñ dee def mooy sa jabar dafa def lu bon da nga gis paa yi time wuñ ko da nga jël sa jaasi di ko naama si di fin bi te moo soo tëddee dama laa rey nga dee jigéen boobu du nelaw guddi loolu daf ko traumatise but of course jigéen itam dañ koy def seen jëkkër yi da nga dégg dafa ñu taka ñaareel jée dafa nga ne ko soo nelawee tee dama laa tur ndomu tàgg
waaw waaye loolu kay leen ñu nangu rek loolu lan la mun a def góor lan la mun a def góor
moo tax mel xel góor yu bëri ñu ngi suffer from heart attack because lu xew mooy they are going through a lot waaye mënuñ koo wax
Davis man dinaa dellu si waat yow si kanam so Aïssatou man fi mu ne nii we want to understand the consenting age. What is that consenting age? Where does it start?
Actually, we have the Children's Act.
Yes.
The Children's Act is actually a law that is mainly for children.
Yeah.
And in the Children's Act, it is telling you that a child is any person below the age of 18 years. Below the age of 18 years, you're a child. You're seen as a child in the eyes of the law. So That being the case, it is said that a child cannot make an informed decision or a child cannot make a consent. So even as a man, when you approach a child to have a sexual intercourse with a child and the child says yes, even like if she consents to having sex with you and eventually you have sex with you, you can be charged with rape or maybe sexual violence because she's a child. Or he is a child, not only men rape, but women as well.
Yes, I think this misconception needs to be clear. Sometimes when rape happens, they'll be like, hey, dafa nangu. Understand? Nangu wonna. But you just made it clear that even if the child says yes, the child can't make a choice at that point.
Yeah, because she's a child. She cannot make an informed decision. So
if you read the Children's Act of 2005 and the Sexual Offences Act of 2013, for me clear what rape is. Even so, they have so long as I'm 18 years, and ask that you should have sex with him or her. That's to give you the license or the warrant to have sex with the child. If you do, it's rape straight because children cannot give consent to sex. But then they wax mo ñew suma nek wala mo bëggon mo wax pour
wala xalé yi légui dañ perdre
xalé dañ lifin ñu ponkal ak yoy non. But so long as the person is below the age of 18, so me sex ak mom rek, it's rape straight. If I understand, sexual violence is beyond just rape, penetration. Fam lu ñe sodomy. Sodomy ci bidiki légui magi ñoo gëna use pampas tan xalé so mo wala xalé. Lolu xew moy sodomy, sexual intercourse through the innocent supplement in the conduct.
Amna fi mom.
Amna fi sax. Amna ñoo xamne they wouldn't have sex with you. What they do is called cunnilingus. Where they would use their tongue to sexually gratify themselves.
Wow.
For parents ñu bay ci xel. Lolu nonu comme su amé yow so ci bay xel do ko mësa xam. Because they're not having penetrating sex with the child. They would use their tongue.
Use pour satisfy seen bopp ci benen manner.
By using their tongue. Wala ngay xalé bo xamne su mo joy ñu nañ ko yobul oncle am bi ni ak yoy nonu. Xamulo naka la ko dee naxee. Am na ñoo xam ne they would take out their private part of manhood and shove it in the mouth of the child. te loolu noonu yow soo dut bàyyi xel doo mën a xam some of those things.
doo ko mës a xam.
am na xale yoo xam dañu si am problème dañoo am infection seen gémmiñ yi bañ dem lopitaan lañ dee xam ne ndeke semaine bi moo dee
ak yooyu
loolu noonu so it's beyond just rape. kuy sagu nga ko yurundu si wanak. Voyeurism. It's a form of sexual abuse. Man ñoo xam ne lu ñu dee def mooy they would take naked pictures of children, especially women, and exhibit it into an art gallery. Exhibitionism is a form of sexual abuse. So all of those things issues are involved by health.
So yes, so this conversation is important, you know, like I mentioned, in as much as the 16 days of activism has passed, for us here on Youth Dialogue, it's every day is 16 days of activism, because to be honest, sexual and gender-based violence is one of our top priorities on this program, because we feel that it is really harmful. So we'll just take a short commercial break, and in this break, I interacted with few young people, and they told me what they think about sexual and gender-based violence, what are the gaps, and what can be done. Let's take a look at that, and when we come back, the discussion continues.
Thank you very much. I think it's important because this is a time that we tend to go around the country and even inform the world and amplify the voices of people that are vulnerable and marginalized, particularly women. So it's important we dedicate time, efforts, and resources to ensure that we gather most of our efforts to amplify the voices of the vulnerable and marginalized groups. It's important.
I agree with everybody else that it doesn't just take a couple of days set aside in a year to promote the rights of women or to talk about the violence and the everyday struggles and challenges that women are faced with in our societies, at different levels of our society. I believe setting aside the 16 days of activism gives women the platform, it gives them a safe space to be able to share their stories, to be able to narrate accounts of experiences that they've had, they continue to have on a daily basis. You know, abuses that have been perpetuated on their bodies, but also to serve as a source of inspiration to all the other women that feel boxed, that are not comfortable to come out with their stories, that are not comfortable to share the abuses that they've met.
I think what we do right now is we advocate, we are sensitized, we also try to amplify the voices of the women that are marginalized and vulnerable. So as a man, it is in fact a moral obligation to ensure that women are protected. So having that at the back of your mind should be the starting point for you to protect women and promote their rights and ensure that they are safely protected in societies. So what we do is more or less a moral obligation, not only that we are men, but it is in fact required of us by society to ensure that we protect our people, particularly women who are vulnerable and marginalized in societies.
It is also a way of promoting the equality that should exist in our societies between men and women, between the different genders that exist, that live in our societies. So it is very important that not just women's rights activists and women-led organizations, people, the government, NGOs, as a collective, as a people, as a country, we come together to look at how far have we come in terms of promoting the rights of Gambian women and protecting and guaranteeing these rights. How far have we come in ensuring that we hold perpetrators accountable for all the violence that they perpetrate on women's bodies in this country? Where do we go on from here? What's the way forward? So these provide the platform needed for conversations to happen around the need to continue protecting the rights of women, not just in the Gambia, but at a global level.
Activism doesn't only have to be backed by some legal requirements that people have to be protected by law, but it's also about moral obligations.
So what policies do you think that exist should be strengthened?
Well, the Gambia, we have the the Women's Act 2010-2020, and we have the National Gender Policy 2020 as well. So these are policies that are already in place, and then the laws that are already in place, which I think don't have so many gaps as far as I'm concerned. So I don't think, in fact, we have a problem of laws or policies. What we have is the issue of operationalizing those laws and policies.
Welcome back from that break. That was an insert there of young people also adding their voice in relation to the fight when it comes to sexual and gender-based violence. He just said there that the laws that exist do not have gaps. So let's have a little discussion based on that. Do you agree with that, Aissatou? The laws that we have, they don't have gaps. They're just there. They're perfect. We just need to implement them. Is that so?
Actually, we have very good laws for the elimination of sexual and gender-based violence. We have the Sexual Offences Act of 2013 that addresses all forms of sexual violence. We have the Domestic Violence Act. We have the Women's Act. We have the Children's Act. Perhaps in the Sexual Offences Act, maybe there is a gap because it does not talk about marital rape. People think that rape cannot happen between a husband and a wife. Of course, it can happen because, as I said earlier, when there is no consent, if you force, it's an act of rape. So, because like when you approach your wife, or maybe you want to have sexual intercourse with your wife, maybe your wife is not well, she's not physically strong or mentally strong.
Or she's on her period.
Exactly, but you force yourself into having sex with your wife. It can be rape, but we don't have that specifically in the in the Sexual Offences Act.
So do you think that the laws, he just said there that these laws are beautiful, there are no gaps, and she just identified one, which is marital rape. So is there any other one that you can identify, or you think apart from that it is okay, it just needs to be implemented?
Like she said, we have very beautiful laws, that is without a doubt. We try to domesticate from the regional level, because Women's Act came from the CEDAW and the Maputo Protocol. But if you look at the Children's Amendment Act, for instance, that talks about FGM, there's nothing like cross-border courting in that law. Of course, FGM is illegal in the Gambia, but of course we know of cases where people would take their children from the Gambia to places like Casamance, Guinea-Bissau, subject them to FGM and then bring them back home. So it does not address the issue of cross-border courting. Also read the Women's Amendment Act, no, the Children's Amendment Act, sorry. It also talks about the issue of child marriage. It says that a marriage between a child and a child, that is contract between a child and a child, or a child and an adult, is voidable. Means there's a possibility of it being void. It doesn't say that it is void, as far as I know. So all of those are different gaps that we need to breach in our legal instruments. Of course, there are also a lot of other gaps. We have beautiful laws, but the implementation becomes a problem. Of course, there are certain institutions, or there are institutions in this country that wouldn't want to hire or employ women of reproductive age, because I mean, if you're a young woman, you're working, you're married, you're going to get pregnant eventually. So when you do, you're entitled to a 6-month maternity leave. You're supposed to be paid your salary in full and every single incentive that you're entitled to. So some of these institutions, as a result of that, wouldn't, want to employ young women. During the course of your interview, sometimes you can tell. Instead of them concentrating on your credentials, they're going to concentrate on your person. Are you married? Are you on family planning? When do you intend to have children? How old are you? And things like that, So then the implementation becomes a problem. Like I also said, sometimes you have some of these employers who would want to have sex with you before you get promoted or before you get employed for certain institutions, and people think that that is pretty normal.
Yeah, that is why just recently on this morning show on QTV, we had the National Human Rights Commission, and I applauded them for coming up with that sexual harassment policy in workplaces. Because to be honest, people are being harassed in workplaces. It's not talked about, it's deemed as normal. You just talked about the fact that when it comes to consent, it's the aftermath of it. That. And that this is part of it at the end of the day. So let me just take you to social protection a little bit, Aissatou. Recently, I interviewed the former president of the of FLAG, that is the Female Lawyers Association, Hadi Dandejabi, and she talked about how the lack of a robust social protection system put in place affected their work. She gave me an instance where a woman was driven out of her house and she had multiple children, and at the end of the day, the children had to be scattered in different households. They couldn't even be together because of a lack of a proper social protection system at that time. So I also spoke to the Deputy Permanent Secretary of the Ministry of Gender and Social Welfare recently, and she told me, and he told me, Kajale Sonko told me that all the infrastructure is in place when it comes to coming up with a robust social protection system. So why the need to have this? Having a proper social protection system, how can this aid your work as the Association for Female Lawyers?
Geneva, as I said earlier, we have very good laws that are laid down in the protection of women who are faced with sexual and gender-based violence. Sure. Even in the Women's Act, Section 6 is telling you, like, prohibits all forms of violence, be it the physical violence, the economic violence, the psychological, emotional violence. It is prohibited under Section 6 of the Women's Act. And actually, it further imposes it on the government, public offices, private offices, to ensure the protection of the legal status of women and children, of course. But enforcement of these laws is always a problem. Sometimes it's not just the victim or the perpetrator, but even the authorities themselves. Because recently we had this reported case about a particular woman who came to our office, lodged a complaint that she's always been beaten by the husband. Even as of now, she's pregnant, but the husband would beat her. Still. So when we ask her, why have you not been reporting these scenes from the onset, what she told us was that because I don't know how to report, as my husband would always threaten me that she has connections. She's very, like, he's very influential with the police. Like, he can easily get anything that he wants. So that was why she was very not confident in opening up, going to the police station and report. So we would say the authorities, some of the authorities and the police officers in concern are always sometimes a problem, because instead of enforcing the law, some of them were taking bribes, which is very bad. And aside from that, the re-victimization of some of these victims. Perhaps a victim will open up, tell her story, tell his or her story. But how society perceives such victims in terms of why would you open up, talk about rape? So instead of giving the victim support,
go ahead,
right? Exactly, they were actually re-victimizing the victim, and that is very bad. That is why most of these victims do not open up to talk about their stories. Aside from that, you would also have the out-of-court settlement. Sometimes when we have these cases, when we are actually planning to initiate a proceeding, like just to enforce the victim's fundamental rights. After all, what all they will say, I want to withdraw the case, or I want...
They do not proceed.
Exactly. I want an outside court settlement. So if that is so, how do you think these rights will be enforced? So it is always a problem, yes.
So Davis, I'll take you back to social protection. Like I mentioned, having a robust social protection system in place, because if you take a look at it, an effective social protection can improve the lives of women. You know, because most of the time women get to suffer when it comes to poverty. And poverty, in a way, brings about sexual and gender-based violence.
Of course.
It's a must.
Of course.
You know, so what do you think about Gambia's social protection system, which they say is under construction? You know, having a proper social protection system, how can that change everything?
The lack of systems contributes a lot to the growth and festering of sexual and gender-based violence. Like you said, the issue of poverty. Men generally are scared of empowered women, that is the truth. So they would rather go for women that they think perhaps are ignorant sort of in a way and do not understand some of these things. If I'm a woman, I'm married, I have like 5, 6 children, and I have an issue with my husband. Let's say an issue of, intimate partner violence.
Ñu olofal.
Wow, okay. So nga am different jëkkër yaa ngi sëy nga am 5, 6 doom saa yu nekk mu laa door li ñu ko xalaat mooy man su ma waree génn si biir kër bi fan laay dem di nga fa des de di nga fa dee waaye su doon yow for instance jàngoon nga amoon nga tuuti xaalis jëkkër bi xam na ne dëgg-dëgg man kii su ma ko laaloon fii ëllëg mu dem jënd kër wala mu ren kër su naanoon sàngara sa du la laal so waaye because amuñ some of those systems in place amuñ place yoo xam ne mën naa house some of these people so daf dee tax ba gars yi des si biir kër yuñ dëkka daf dee tax sexual and gender based violence bi day gën a continuer muy gën a continuer so soo lekkul si kër bi yaa ngi xiif da nga dem am sexual intercourse with someone else outside du dëgga te one of the reasons they report cases of sexual and gender based violence is because they get blackmailed by their abusers ko la abuse ba pare mu bëgg la mu jox la $10,000 to $20 maybe comme fii nii sa tane na waaye if it's in the interior of the country loolu xaalis bu bari la so poverty mun naa tax yow doo report some of those issues
ba pare Davis gis nañ ne COVID-19 pandemic bi tax na sexual and gender based violence cases mu dem up yaa ngi dégg so man lu ma bëgg a xam mooy sensitization bi àggut fu mu war a àgga wala luy problème bi because bu doon dëgga sensitization bi àgga na fu mu war a àgga because dañ tëju ñun ñëpp ñu nekk si benn kër taxut nit mu dóor ma taxut nit mu tëddoo ma wala def ma leneen lu ma war ta def kon àggaanguñ de
sensitization bi
waaw
lu ma leer ba leer ma man mooy
waaw
the past 30 years or more ñu ngi sensitize people on the effects of sexual and gender based violence if you read the multiple indicator cluster survey the mixed report of 2018 mu ne awareness raising level bi is at 98%. There is nobody Gambia yëpp ku la wane musta dégg an issue of FGM for example wala child rights waaye attitudinal change moo nekk suñu problème te because ñu ngi dégg société yi nga xam ne ñu ngi normalize some of these things even though xam nañ ko ku nekk si àdduna bi ko xam ne réeb baaxut ñëpp xam nañ réeb baaxut da nga ko dee def rek bos da nga am doole wala da nga am xaalis
kon yarin bi la wala lan la
attitudinal change si jikko yi la
problème bi because fan la problème bi di jóge
si jikko yi la bon rek la
bon la de
bon la rek because ñëpp xam nga ne warloo saaja people still xam nga ne warloo reeni soo reeni dañ la bu meltu and people still kill so I mean sensitization ba tey suñu fi nekk si programme bi like tens of thousands of people ñu ñoo seetaan du dégg te am na yeneen programme yu amoon balaa tey te after tey am na yeneen yu am man balaa ma fi ñëw radio la nekk maa ngi woon Paradise FM so ñu ngi def sensitization bi so like nu ma la ko waxee rek bon la xam nga ne yow again SGBV is about power doole la man su ma doon roma fii nii xaw ma la musuma laa gis dama daanu sa kaw it's always calculated SGBV is hardly or seldom spontaneous because man dama la jege torop if you're sexually abused by your father for instance foo ko reporté imam mu nekk sa koñ su la ooyoon tey man su ma la ooyoon man Modou Lamine Davis man la kay nga ñëw seet si ma doo ñëw yow xamuloo ma bu baax wala óoluwuloo ma because nongoo la perhaps
waaye borom doole
imam bi su la ooyee di nga dem that is supposed to be your guide to God du dégg so imam is sexual abuse is sexual yow loolu foo ko reporté soo ko reporté ku laa gom so because of that ñu bari ñu report some of these cases ba pare because you are always perpetrator of one thing la dañ njëkk a dem def mooy su getting rid of lu ñu internal inhibitors you get inhibit from doing the abuse mu get rid of the external ones lu ñu def mooy daf dee try pour yow nga óolu ko dama la sponsor dama la dimbale sa home
moytul ma kii de kii dafa bon de moytul ma kii
def boppam ku baax loolu la dee def even some so called I don't like calling them hifosis some so called
moo tax man hifosi dëggalaam du dëgga man dama xaw ma
but they don't hifosis jëna
waaw waaye yow fay kon naka ngaa mun a gomee kan ngaa mun a gom ne kii hifosi la mun naa dem si kii sa wax ak kii tem nga dem wax ak kooku sa kooku tam abuse la si kaw loolu kon fu nit ñi jëm
warloo gom kenn when it comes to SGBV muy góor muy jigéen that is the truth you look at the issue of trafficking for instance sa baajan dafa nekk kombo fii mu ne sa yaay jom ma ko mu yóbbu ko school du dégg mu indi la mu def la mi naan gars yi di ko fay moom mu si am xaalis SGBV warloo óolu kenn including Modou Lamine Davis bu nekk di explain lii because ku la dee sexually abuse dafa dee jege understand sa vulnerability xam na yow sa doole fu mu àgg ak fu mu àggul loo xam ak loo xamut moo tax mu la dee abuse sexually moo tax ma ne sa kër there is something called incest as a form of sexual abuse sexual intercourse between people who are related by blood sa principal bi sa school bi sa teacher bi ko óolu nga ko foog nga ne am na doole yow as a naive 10 or 11-year-old girl for instance strategy abuse dafa ko reporté wala soo abuse dafa dee threaten xam nga soo ko waxee kenn du la gëm
just to shed more light on that, I don't think there are gaps when it comes to sensitization on the existing laws relating to gender-based violence or sexual gender. Like civil society organizations have been doing their quarterly or best when it comes to sensitizing communities. We've been engaged in community outreach programs, but perhaps some people do not just want to be law-abiding citizens. And most of this sexual gender-based violence is from families, within the family. And that is why when it happens within the family, with this Maslaha syndrome, people don't open up to report. Because perhaps when like an uncle of mine or a father of mine rapes me, who am I to speak it out? I wouldn't want to like, talk about my father raping me, something like that.
So now, how can we inculcate that in children, whereby they can speak up? What can we do to make them speak up, to have their voice, to be able to say no? How can we do that?
I don't really want to force that, if I may.
Okay.
We need to let children understand that their bodies belong to them.
Mooy na seen yaram yi ñoom ñoo ko moom.
Warloo nangu kenn am foog ne am na dat sañ-sañ te Gambia mi dafa sañ de. That is the honest truth. Warloo nangu nit war laa laal in a place yi nga xam ne you're not comfortable with as a person. But also, it is dañu war a understand ne it's difficult to come out to say ne man dañ ma rape. Because one, mun na ñàkk a óolu. Your life might be at risk. 3, stigma bi ak yu noonu yëpp soo ko xalaatee doo ñëw. Da nga war a óolu ku ñëw mu ne dañ ma sexual abuse. Sometimes dañ dee make up stories which is true.
Waaw ñu ne loolu tam am na fi.
Daf lay am without a doubt. Daf lay am nga ñëw tuumal nit wala lifin dara maybe da nga ñëw.
Waaye xam nga loolu tam dafa tilimal ñu génn di wax true
stories.
stories.
Waaye man I'd rather believe ku ñëw mu ne ma dañ ma rape. dañ ñàkk koo believe support perpetrator. Su dee dama ñëw realize ne rape bi amut. c'est mon xaa mu fees ko waaye su ma believe perpetrator tey ëllëg ak si biir ma ñëw gis ne que rape bi am na gàcce boobu noonu
waaye fooguloo bul believe perpetrator bi tam
ñu seet mun la ko believe
waaw ñu seet
so I'm always supposed to believe the victim at all times.
Okay, no matter what victim bi rek nga war a gëm.
dafa jafe pour mu génn si biti it's difficult.
Yeah, and the difficulty about it is sometimes it is very difficult pour nga prove rape because sometimes when a victim like encounters rape or being raped, like she does not report or he does not report immediately. And it is very important when it happens you report. Exactly, so that like there can be evidence to prove in a court of law that yes there was rape. But if you don't open up, sometimes some people will keep it into themselves until after a couple of weeks or a couple of months and then they voice it out. And when such happens, it's always difficult or almost difficult.
To prove it. Danga dem let's say l'hôpital ñoo la ma jël police report expérience boobu si l'hôpital bi nga war a expérience boobu si police bi nga war a delluwaat si l'hôpital bi génn
yow mi génna
re-traumatization
waaw because yaa ngi ko explainal ñu bari te xamuloo si kan la moo aaga
understand
waaw
so léegi network against gender based violence of course ak seen partner si ministry bi ak UNFPA dañ am lu ñu ne ooyee di one stop center Edward Francis Small, Sarakunda, ak other hospitals.
Okay, are you aware of that?
Yeah,
of
you
course.
Also have it in Bundung, which
in Bundung and other places.
Okay.
So for them, it's a bit neat. Think for perhaps a counselor, think for a legal person. Normal, none of our them. Think for doctor. Every single individual board on solar, think for room. Then you'll have to explain yourself just once. Understand? Rather than put them explain kisa boba kile akiyo non. But also tamit. Then you want to strengthen or a confidential reporting. If you're reporting me, because they have more. Come man, suma yege na limi gam si kerbini. Then you'll hamanta na nyam buba. Duma buga madam police guy na wow Davis mojo fenfi. Mother toll free line si am solo.
Wow.
Mun na jël suma téléphone de police ne kër bi ni so fa li fi ne.
Moy 13
1313 1025 199 they are toll free numbers ni lo program credit. Da nga call kër bi ni de li ak li mo fa xew. Understand? Police normally war na ñoo mëna dem def investigation te sa tur do feñ. So waxe again it's confidential but ñu feñ ci sa tur. So ne nga yobu
waaye mbaa loolu yomb na Gambia.
Dala yomb na.
Pour ndax dañ dee mën a yombal loolu pour nga mën a hide sa identity in these things.
But you are supposed to make it clear to the police to say ne yaa ngi report in confidentiality. Bëgguloo sa turu feeñ si. Kenn mënu la forcer pour sa turu feeñ. But you have an obligation or responsibility to ensure reporting cases of these things. You're never supposed to turn a blind eye. Because la jotee dalee yow wala sa mbokk kon kenn du report.
Kenn du report. So Davis pour ñu wax ne rek ne line si tamit mun nañ koo ubbi fi mu nekk nii su ko defee ñu bëgg a connect ak ñun ñu share ak ñun naka lañ mun a saafaraale problème bii nii mun ngeen ñoo call si 5050505 su ko defee soo la ñu callee foofu noonu ñu gën a mun a waxtaan because comme liñ ko waxee li collective effort la nekkut am effort yi benn nit lii dafa xew si kër yi xew si mbedd yi xew si school yi xew fu nekk even këri worship yi sax lii mu ngi faa xew comme noo ko waxee so dafa nekk loo xam ne it's just a collective conversation so 5050505 call us there on 5050505 and just bring in your contribution when it comes to this so man Davis dafa am lu ma dégga mooy initiation góor bi nga xam ne daf xale yi dañ daan dem lu ñoo ooyee initiation have an initiation ceremony time boobu léegi it's done the medical way ñu yóbbu xale yi ñu lii dem si hospital yi ak yooyu dama dégg man xaw ma da dégg la de dama dégg ne waa ñu ne am nañ benn call si line bi ñu uyu ko rek su ko defee ñu continuer waxtaan bi asalaamaaleykum
waaleykum salaam jërëjëf waay
jërëjëf oncle naka nga tudda ak fooy koolee
maa ngi koolee
Kaani Fing ak naka nga tudda
imam bi la
Babali
waaw
imam Babali waaw ñu ngi laa dalal si programme bi su ko defee yow tamit nga sànni sa kaddu rek wax ñu naka lañ mën a saafaraale sexual and gender based violence
xam nga programme bi dafa am solo waaye gender based violence ñëpp a ci war a jàpp ñëpp a ci war a wax ndax suñ ne gender based violence rek xel yëpp dafa daw di góor yee toroxal jigéen yi
ok
góor yee dóor jigéen ñi te léeg-léeg tam nga gis li gën a bari ci gender based violence man yi ma xam te ëppale ñeent fukki at maa ngi cee liggéey jigéen ñee gën a soxor ci seen morom yi waaw ndax mbindaan mi ci kër gi ñaareel jigéen lay doon
waaw
soo ko laajee ki koo gisee ñaareel jigéen la ni moom
waaw
su ma jabar jigéen la soo seete ko gën a gisee ci njaboot gi jëkkee mii la yaa ngi dégg
waaw gis nañ si contexte gis nañ si angle booy demee waaw
man contexte ma waxee dafa am solo de
dafa am solo
néew na nga gis góor bu jëteen jigéen ba sëy bi tas bu dee ñaar ñiy dencante nag nañ coppa ca doorin ba na doon ñu buggante na doon ñoo xam ne méngoo nañ mooy yéen gune yi li gën a compatibility dafa important ci sëy
wax dëgg
compatibility su amee ñaareel déggoo dina mun a am waaw waaye waxal suma mag yooyu nekk sa boor mu dem uti jabar nag
ñu ne nga uti jabar
xam naa ko bu baax xam na ma wax ko de bu góorgóorlu
baax na balaa fay jógee nag ñu utal ko jabar imam balaa fay jógee ñu takkee ko fii si programme bi fii youth dialogue David waaw so imam wax na lu am solo imam wax na ne njëkke yi ñooy soonal jabar yi si kër yi te sometimes ñu def leen loo xam ne sa sexual and gender based violence la parce que jigéen nga moo tax ñu laa métital yéen a métital yi mindaan bi si kër bi mooy house help bi ngeen baalal ma jigéen a ko employé métital ko tamit so ñun tamit as jigéen foo naa war nañoo mun a seetaat suñ boppa si yi nga xam ne dañ koo def te violence la on the next jigéen
yeah boobu like he was referring to power inequality. So gender-based violence nekkul just ne góor a ko def jigéen ou jigéen a ko def góor.
waaw so fi mu nekk nii ñu ne dañ am beneen caller waaye dañoo jël about ñetti calls su ko defee ñu discuss and then ñu jëlaat yeneen caller so asalaamaaleykum.
hello.
ñu ngi laa dégg naka nga tudd ak fooy callee.
My name is Mr. Lavin. My name is Mr. Lamin Kebe.
Mr. Lamin Kebe, welcome to the program. So what is your take on our topic of discussion today, sexual and gender-based violence?
I think the program is very much important.
Okay.
Thank you.
Looking at the situation of women and children in the Gambia.
Mm-hmm. So how do you think this narrative can be changed?
With the police, gender and child welfare unit.
Okay.
Yeah, and what you people are discussing, I think is very important when it comes to confidentiality, because most of the time, people will report cases and say, I don't want to be a witness to a case, and Mohammed Lavin has been explaining the gender-based violence helpline 1313.
Sure.
Which most of the time the individual might report of an incident, but don't want people to know that he or she is the one who reports. And it's very important also the identity to be hidden, because we all know our society, our home settings. Probably, the one you are reported is your relative, and you don't want him or her to know that you are the one who report.
Yeah.
So, and that's why most of the time, when you talk about gender-based violence helpline 1313, if you look at the composition, you also have police officers among them, so that if those cases are reported to the helpline, that the information will be filtered to that police officer who is part of the helpline, so that he will also take it up at any police anywhere that the matter is reported. Then he will work with that nearest police station to make sure that the individual identity can be hid, and then if he or she don't want to be a witness, then he can be, because this is what will bring trust between the community and the police in terms of reporting of certain cases.
Sure. So
and another important point is you talk about that is social protection system.
Yes.
And I think this is very important. Most of the time, cases will be reported, and you will see the investigation will be conducted, and it's only left for legal proceedings. And along the line, the victims will say, I'm not interested to go. Because sometimes it's not a matter of being, because they look at the aftermath. I'll give an example like husband and wife battering, and if the matter is reported to the police, 3 or 4 days, you will see them, saying that, I don't want any legal action. Based on the situation, based on family pressure, and based on other situations like, if this matter is taken to court, my husband is jailed, who is going to take care, who is going to support me and my children? So if there are certain social protection system in place, at least people will come forward to report some of these cases. I will give an example of a case of defilement or a case of teenage pregnancy where a girl child has been impregnated by an adult, and the perpetrator is taken before the court and then sentenced. You look at look at that that child who is bearing, that other child who is bearing on board child, and the perpetrator is now taken to mile 2. Who is going to support that child with that pregnancy, and until if she delivers, who is going to support her? So these are some of the issues. Sometimes it's always difficult, because for us also at the police level, sometimes people will say we always want to withdraw cases. Sometimes we sometimes even push certain cases, but at the end, you see some of these witnesses will even gain their life, because they are not interested to pursue with the matter. So even if you want to push, so these are some of the challenges, because you look at the social system, I think there is need for that social protection system to be in place. So,
so thank you so much. Thank you so much for that comment. Like I mentioned recently, I had a conversation with Kajali Sonko, who is the Deputy Permanent Secretary at the Ministry of Gender and Social Welfare, and he talked about the fact that all the necessary infrastructure is in place to have a proper social protection system. So we are looking forward to that. It's still under construction, but like you mentioned, with a proper social protection system, then eventually the narrative will change. If we have another caller on the line, we can take it. If that is not the case, we'll be able to continue with the discussion. I think it was important that you brought in the issue of confidentiality, Mamadou.
Of course. That's important. Because confidentiality is so a lot of people do not report some of these things. We are very closely knitted society. Everyone knows everyone in this country. So fuck that confidentiality never. But for sexual and gender-based violence, the state has to be serious about that. What I mean to say is...
The political will.
The political will has to be there. It's beyond just passing laws and things like that. Maybe perhaps parents are making bàyyi na ma ko dee toroxal dëgg la waaye soo waree jël bàjjen mi nga yóbbu ko mile 2 for instance xale bi noo ko def
mooy social protection
understand nga ma so ñu war a am système si nga xam ne at least xale yooyu noonu nañ mën a dugal ay place yi nga xam ne they would have the best condition of life because at the end of the day you also need to look and safeguard the best interest of the child. The Children's Act is very clear about it. It says that the best interest of the child shall be the primary consideration of everyone. So it's irrespective of the more. The UNCRC has over 54 articles. ACRWCB 49. All of that combined.
So film nani sunjele last caller bini ñu mëna waxtaan su dul lolu suñu waxtaan bi nak dina xawa démé bor so assalamu alaykum. Assalamu alaykum.
Wa alaykum salam Jenaba.
Naam.
Naka wa alaykum salam.
Naka nga tudda ak foño kolé?
Okay, Mariama la tudda. I'm calling from Lamen.
Okay, so yow lan nga am pour yokkatay ci programme bi ñu ngi waxtaane sexual and gender based violence.
Okay, I had to call. This is the first time that I'm calling on the radio, on a television program.
Okay.
This is very interesting. That is why I want to give my own contribution. Well, I think we have to change our attitude towards sexual violence if we want to fight sexual violence. Because you will see in a case that somebody will be married in a house, being violated, and you have somebody you trust. You go to the person to talk, and they'll be like, "Damal na dem say, li aduna la dangay sayal sa doom, sayal be dee." At the end, the person will lose their life, and exactly.
Wow, dafa mel ni kooku moom dem na. So mom particularly she's trying to bring about kër yi. Dafa mel ni lii daal kër yi si kër yi la gën a bon.
It's
sexual
very
and gender-based violence.
It's very important because that reflected on a particular case that we had because the woman, like, she was encountering sexual gender-based violence by the husband, of course, but because she could not open up because of the children she has with the husband, that she has about 3 children, and the problem if she should report the husband and the husband being taken to police or being prosecuted in court, how about the children, because she does not have anywhere to go. So that's also a problem, like the family relations and perhaps poverty is also a contributing factor.
So fi mu ne nii ñu delluwaat rek fuñ emoon about the social protection ne fi mu nekk nii structures yi suñ amutee fan la xale yi di dem ak seen yaay yi and all of that.
My problem, what are you buried like police be, of course, I'll just hold brief for the police, do direct. So sometimes when you hold some of those situations like you know, it's very difficult for you to forward issue like you know, because at the end of the day, how about no quote about for more like school, all of those things that you want to put into consideration. So government then you want to come cheap in political we want to you finance some of these, even I mean infrastructural living you guys to ensure na xale yu nekk foofu noonu ñu mën leen a toppatoo place bi nekk place bu baax xale mën a dem school ak yooyu noonu.
waaye gis nañ fi benn orphanage bu fi amoon ñu gis fa tamit abuses yu fa happen so fi mu nekk nii kan nga mën a trust Davis.
On na ko fi de when it comes to SGBV what will trust can including myself. I say this and I keep saying it du neex ñu bari. Places like orphanages. Madrasas.
Wow.
Sexual and gender-based violence for they am. They am suñ biir kër yi sax. But children are always scared or afraid to report. Because of all even the ñaar dool bu ñu la bëgg a rey. Dóore bu fa dee am. Sexual abuse bu fa dee am. Bés bu ñu defee a serious study into some of those places. Di nga gis some really graphic things yu fa jógee.
Kon what is the role of religious leaders in this instant fi mu nekk nii parce que tudda nga fi madrasas gis nañ fi imam Babali lu yaagut kool moom bokk na si imam yooyu nga xam ne ak imam Ja masha Allah moom it parce que gender champion la. Award nañ ko as a gender champion imam Ja ak yeneen imam si bi dëkk bi gis nañ ne ñu ngi téye waaye ba léegi dafa am ñu war a join tamit.
So imam yi they have a huge role to play in this because people listen to them. Duñ dee dégloo imam bi excuse me duñ ko dee dégloo Modou Davis people trust them so ñoom it foog ñu bokka si biir liggéey bi but if you're an imam and you're talking about issues around sexual and gender-based violence sometimes they receive a lot of backlash when I've traveled with Babali to a lot of countries suma waay la xamante ne bon da nga gis ne moom because I call him a modern imam daf lay am a lot of issues when it comes to these things ndew ataka do musu ko to mo se fi jigéen la day nekk jigéen yi nii jigéen ne ak yooyu noonu understand
that is what they associate him with
a lot of people wouldn't also come ñi nga xam ne ay imam la but fuck imam yi understand ne ñoom they have a huge role to play people trust them and listen to them wow
at the end of the day
seen samoon si ñu dugal ko fa ñu bàyyi comme history yonente beeg Isa ak yoon ñëpp xam nañ loolu si dëkk
waaw gis nañ fi ñoom imam Ja nag imam Ja gis nañ moom daf dee wax si corruption moom nag gis nañ ne daf dee samoon sami daf dee mën a nekk on a daily basis lan moo nekk di xew si dëkk bi
samoon noonu la war a mel
waaw wax dëgg
story prophet bi ñoo xam nañ ko si dëkk bi léegi so léegi things yoo xam ne ñoo nekk di xew like SGBV ak yooyu
ñu boole ko si
dañu war a boole si samoon si
So what is the role of religious leaders? At Flag, what is your relationship with religious leaders?
We ensure that we build around sensitization. We work with these Kadi court people in the Kadi courts. So we've been doing our quarterly best in sensitizing people about laws that affect women, laws about sexual and gender-based violence. So I think even if we continue sensitizing, we cannot just actually totally eradicate it, but we will continue doing it just to minimize it, but we cannot totally eradicate.
So bude caller dafa nekk ci line bi mun nañ ko jël because it seems so we do not have a caller on the line. So Davis, you said something very important about the fact that you shouldn't trust anybody when it comes to sexual and gender-based violence. I don't know if Jama Jack is watching, but just yesterday night we were having a conversation. Munema, we should not tell the girl child to be nice. Let's tell the girl child to be kind. Because when you're nice, you're taken advantage of. Is that the same view you go with?
I agree. You have to be a contrarian. A different sort of, like I said, Gambian with a son. So I ask people, more they cause rape, dress code and things like that. Put man, rape is more they cause rape. All of those things, all of those trivial issues in the tribe would bring on board. Put man, but like I said, men generally are scared of empowered and educated women. It goes back to the parents. Then you want to make sure some domi jigen is with killing you in school and so you janga. I'm not go so the phones are going to sanga jama jak doko door. I'm going to so go door was go sage. Hamna fumu jarak yo du dega. So they ko xamne la xam nga ne ki paps mu xam bari wut am dole vinut so they advantage I mean of the person.
Yeah,
so yeah, you can be kind, that is important, but
nit ki lum sol ndax lolu war na determine sexual and gender based violence mu happen.
No, I would say no, because I have my right to dress anyhow I want. So my dress code should not cause you raping me. It's my right to dress anyhow I want. So usually just perpetrate more bondrek and perhaps Buga satisfy his or her sexual desires. But dress code has nothing to do with causing
so dress
rape.
code?
They just use that for different and bobarek. Babies as young as 6 months, 1 year, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, they get sexual abuse.
Exactly, and they cannot attract.
At home, we see our sisters. I'm not sisters like you know, our mothers. So you also learn say, "I will be feeling more." They don't musa dofna danga sexual abuse a sister for instance. Then why would you abuse another person's sister? Come if you matela, like I said, if you dollar, hamna de mala opa dollars, mala ko de federa do sigena. Hamna de mala opa plus. So munna la sexual abuse do sigena. But rape has little or nothing to do with a person's dress code.
I'm not luma don wa call biduga more about initiation ceremonies in that tay dama don am conversation ak kena mune mané man de buga na dara nga yoko ko ci sa discussion bi nga hall naka la mo mel mune mané time bobu biñ daan def initiation ñom dañ leen daan wax né jigen dafa am fo wara em ak mom comme dañ leen wonon né jigen dang ko wara respect wa wala dedet.
Of course. So just demba man am discussion with and I told the person man bena adam mo nekk di décider ka won né hut moy yefi lifin comme lil
wa moy initiation bu góor lañ wax wa
ay bu jigen initiation without cutting one daf la jangal person di nga xam bot second di nga understand ne comme ya jigen fi nga wara am ak fa la wara am man even at my this big age am na kersa pour suma yaay wala suma mam nekk ci kër bi ma jël xale bu jigen romb ak mom def ci biir kër bi kan duma door du dega ba ma yoy nonu yeb ci yarin bi la. So initiation bobu nonu comme
am na lo fi wax de.
No, of course. Ñep di ma ci addo bi ba ma sétal. Am na kersa suma mamba wala suma yaay tok morom ak jigen.
Waaw.
Lolu am wax. Right? So am na solo. Lolu su amé moy dañ la di jangal passine di nga ñoo ñu tégal dara so démé bu néegi jambour. Am na nu mo tégué dalam bi do duga. So démé kéré jambour am ñoo tégué way xalé légui xam dara dañoo ñu konko sa duñ ko def ci.
Duñ ko def dañoo ñëw rek duga.
Du dega. So jigen ni tamit dañ dé of course FGM is a no-go area. But we're going to the issue of initiation.
Wow.
Yobu jigeni maybe bena plus conversations with them. Understand what I've done dina gis party after gay dina indi xalé ci biti dina
label len wax len history and all of those things.
Comme message fa lay nekk ci bi lébi. Boko na ci yari ba par di nga xam sa xalé goor ak sa doomu jigeni dañu ci kër bi or
not. Dafa melni time bi mom dafa jé fim na ni loolu lañ ma nekk di wax time bi dafa jé 2 minutes rek lañ am so finally Davis lan nga tejé.
Duma tejé moy fokk ñu understand especially goor yi. Ne mënuñoo yóbbu dëkk bi mënuñoo dem leave women behind. We cannot see women as second-class citizens because women, put man, they hold half the sky. Understand? So
for you, women hold half the sky.
Okay. Te benn sad munta dem ñu bay benen bi ci gannaaw. So foog ñu ñëpp together and then show up ñu end
So I said to finally.
Finally, I want to say there should be power in equality. Let's respect each other's rights to ensure that also women, they speak up when they're faced with any form of violence. Speak it out, because if you keep it in yourself, like it will not solve your solution.
Your problems.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yow daal nga ne he for she am na waaye buñ trust benn góor.
No, never, including myself.
Including yow.
Oh.
Kon man fi mu nekk nii bàyyi naa la. te ñu ne nga takki jabar. So viewers, I'm afraid that is all we have for you in this edition of Youth Dialogue. Bye for now. See you next week.